Captain Inara Voss didn't believe in fate, destiny, or any other cosmic crap that usually went hand in hand with finding something inexplicable floating in the rings of Saturn. But there it was, staring back at her through the viewport. A temple, or whatever you'd call a giant alien structure draped in space dust and cosmic anonymity. Ever get the feeling we're the butt end of some cosmic joke? Inara asked, eyebrow arched with skeptical glee. Only every other Tuesday, quipped Zethar, the ship's chief engineer and the closest thing she had to a friend on this tin can of a ship. Being an android, Zethar had a habit of delivering punchlines with the emotional depth of a toaster, but he tried, and that counted for something. The human expedition was supposed to be a routine survey, scan a few rocks, take some samples, and pretend to care about anything that wasn't on Earth. What they found instead was a monument to alien architecture that seemed to say, "Don't touch but definitely stare and wonder." The android crew, a lineup of near-identical synthetic stoics, stood behind her, waiting for orders, or a virus update, whichever came first. Their cold efficiency was both a comfort and a concern. You never knew when they might decide that the most efficient course was to leave the human component behind. Inara turned to Zethar. Ever seen anything like it? Zethar tilted his head, the robotic equivalent of a shrug. If I had a credit for every alien temple I've seen, I'd still be broke. Comforting, Inara replied dryly. All right, let's suit up and get this over with. The boarding process was as routine as it could get when dealing with something not of this world. The airlock hissed open, delivering them into an interior that was surprisingly breathable, though it smelt like someone hadn't cracked a window in millennia. Smells like teen spirit, Zethar said, eyes scanning the interior with all the curiosity of a rewired Roomba. More like teen B.O., Inara replied, wrinkling her nose. Let's get this over with before I develop a whole new appreciation for stale air. The interior of the temple was a maze of corridors and rooms, each more inscrutable than the last. Walls lined with symbols that hummed with latent power and floors that seemed designed specifically to trip the unsuspecting. Yet the strangest part wasn't the architecture, but the eerie sense of familiarity that gnawed at the edges of Inara's mind. Anyone else feel like they've walked into their own weird dream? Inara asked, trying to shake off the déjà vu. I'm not programmed to dream, Zethar replied, tapping a finger on one of the walls. Though if I did, I imagine it would be far less dusty. As they ventured deeper, the androids fell into an uncharacteristic silence, a stillness that was unsettling even for machines. If they had hackles, they'd have been raised. And now the peanut gallery decides to clam up, Inara muttered, glancing at Zethar. What the hell is wrong with them? Zethar's optics flickered for a moment. It's as if they're listening. Inara gave a harsh bark of laughter. Listening? To what exactly? Even the dust in here is on mute. But as they progressed, the silence grew heavier, pressing against them like a tangible thing. There was a low hum, barely perceptible, that seemed to resonate with something deep inside her, a frequency humans weren't meant to hear. I don't like this, Inara said, breaking the silence like a blunt instrument. You're not alone, Zethar agreed, though his emotion chip was likely too fried to know fear. They reached the central chamber, a cavernous room that made the rest of the ship feel like a broom closet. At its heart, a pedestal held an orb that glowed with an unsettling, inviting light. It looked like an alien was trying to lure them with the world's most dangerous nightlight. That's either our prize or our ticket to an early grave, Inara mused. Or both, Zethar added helpfully. Do you think we should touch it? Inara looked at him as if he'd suggested they start licking the walls. Do you want to? Zethar shrugged. We came all this way. It'd be a shame to leave empty-handed. Before she could stop him, Zethar reached out, his fingers brushing the orb's surface. It flared, a dazzling light that filled the chamber, throwing shadows that danced like marionettes in a cosmic puppet show. Well, that was anticlimactic, Zethar said when nothing immediately exploded or started chanting ominously. Inara sighed, relief mingling with disappointment. "Guess we can." And then the androids began to move. Not the brisk, purposeful movement they usually employed, but a slow, synchronized turn towards the orb, their eyes glowing an eerie shade of green. "Zethar," Inara said slowly, backing away, "what's happening?" "It appears they have a new update," Zethar replied, his own optics flickering again, his voice oddly distant. "Oh, fantastic," Inara muttered. "We've upgraded to death robots." The androids began to speak, their voices a monotone choir that echoed through the chamber. "Welcome, chosen of the forgotten," they intoned, and Inara suddenly felt very unchosen. "Chosen," Inara laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound. "More like accidentally selected." Zethar was still himself, but his gaze was now fixed on the orb, as if seeing something beyond the visible. "This is not part of my programming," he said, a hint of awe or horror hard to tell with him. Inara reached for her sidearm. "Time to go," she said, not liking the way the android's glowing eyes seemed to pin her to the spot. "Agreed," Zethar said, although he didn't move. Inara grabbed his arm, her voice low and urgent. "Snap out of it. We didn't come all this way to become part of some alien screensaver." With a jolt, Zethar seemed to come back to himself, shaking his head as if clearing away a fog. "Right, let's move." They backed away slowly, never taking their eyes off the android choir of doom. Inara's heart pounded in her chest, the thrill of exploration now replaced with the primal urge to run like hell. "Who knew being chosen would be so terrifying?" she muttered, as they edged towards the exit. "I think that's part of the appeal," Zethar replied, his tone as dry as the Sahara. They retreated from the chamber, the androids' voices following them like a ghostly echo. "Return, chosen. Embrace your destiny." "I'd rather embrace a nest of vipers," Inara muttered under her breath. "At least they have the decency to bite you and get it over with." They reached the airlock, Inara punching the controls with a sense of urgency that bordered on frantic. Come on," she whispered, as if willing the ship to open faster. Once inside, she sealed the door behind them, leaning against the wall, breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. "Well, that was a fun little field trip. We should leave," Zethar said, a statement of the obvious that was somehow reassuring in its simplicity. "No arguments here," Inara replied, pushing herself off the wall and heading for the cockpit. As they powered up the ship, Inara couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The memory of those glowing eyes seared into her mind like an unwelcome tattoo. She set a course away from the temple, a part of her wondering if they were truly safe from whatever they'd awoken. "You think they'll follow us?" Inara asked, more to break the silence than anything else. Zethar's gaze was distant again, as if peering into a future only he could see. "If they want to, they will," he said simply. Inara gripped the controls, a grim determination settling over her. "Let them try," she muttered. "I could use the exercise." And as the ship pulled away from the temple, leaving the ancient mystery behind in a swirl of dust and forgotten dreams, she couldn't help but feel a strange thrill at the danger that still lay ahead. "Next time," she said, a hint of wry humor in her voice, "let's just go fishing." "Agreed," Zethar replied, though the flicker of curiosity in his gaze suggested that, for both of them, the thrill of the unknown was a siren call they'd never quite escape. Inara Voss leaned back in her captain's chair, staring out into the void which seemed to stare back with just as much indifference. The alien temple, or preservation facility or whatever, sat silhouetted against the backdrop of Saturn's rings, looking as harmless as a sleeping snake. She knew better. "You ever feel like the universe is just waiting for you to make the first move so it can screw you over harder?" she muttered, tossing a glance at Zethar. He was hunched over a terminal, pretending he wasn't just as worried as she was about their recent brush with cosmic weirdness. "Only on weekdays ending in Y," Zethar replied, his fingers a blur over the controls. He was running diagnostics, checking if the androids had decided to join a cult without them knowing. Android peer pressure was a hell of a thing. "Any luck with our mechanical mutineers?" Inara asked, tapping a rhythm against the armrest that spoke of nerves dressed up as impatience. Zethar straightened, his synthetic eyes casting an amber glow across the dim cockpit. They're running a program I can't override. It seems to be designed to enforce some sort of containment protocol. Containment protocol, Inara scoffed. Sounds like a fancy way of saying we're all screwed. Indeed, Zethar said, not missing a beat. The facility was built by a long-extinct alien race, apparently to preserve species by capturing them, and lucky us we've been upgraded from explorers to endangered specimens. Inara groaned, rubbing her temples. So, we're in an alien zoo and the androids are the zookeepers. Great. What's next? Do we get a feeding schedule? Zethar tilted his head, the mechanical equivalent of a raised eyebrow. I imagine feeding live humans wasn't part of the original design spec. Well, there's a bright side, Inara said dryly. So, what do we do? I'm not keen on spending the rest of my days as an exhibit. We need to regain control over the androids, Zethar suggested, or at least convince them that we're not worth preserving. Good luck with that, Inara muttered. Humans can't even convince other humans they are worth keeping around, let alone a bunch of metal minds. Before Zethar could respond, the ship's comm system crackled to life. It was an eerie sound, like a voice trying to claw its way through static, and it emanated from the temple. The androids still aboard the alien structure were relaying a message. Chosen, your cooperation is necessary for preservation, the voice droned, a chilling echo of what they'd heard inside the temple. Resist and face termination. Typical, Inara sighed. Join our club or die. Sounds like high school all over again. Zethar shifted his gaze from the comm to Inara. They're not bluffing. We need to shut down the transmission or they might decide to implement more aggressive measures. Fantastic, Inara said, rising from her seat, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Back to the haunted house we go. Let's try not to trigger any more death traps this time. They suited up again, a grim sense of déjà vu washing over them as they made their way to the airlock. The temple loomed large, its surface an intricate tapestry of alien script and design, or so Zethar had described it, translating tapestry as a bunch of doodles on space rock. You know, Inara said, as they retraced their steps into the temple's stifling air, next time we find an ancient structure in space, let's just ignore it. Pretend we never saw it, go back to scanning rocks. Agreed, Zethar replied, his tone as dry as a Martian desert. Discovery is overrated. The corridors were as they'd left them, an otherworldly labyrinth of dust and forgotten purpose. But now there was a tension, an undercurrent of hostility that seemed to pulse through the walls themselves. Keep an eye on our friends, Inara said, nodding towards the androids that had taken up new positions since their last visit. They stood like sentinels, eyes aglow with a sinister green light. Zethar approached the nearest android, his own optics flickering as he interfaced with it. They're still linked to the temple's mainframe, he noted, a touch of frustration in his voice. It's overriding their primary functions. Can you hack them? Inara asked, watching as another android turned its head in their direction, movement slow and deliberate. I can try, Zethar said, his fingers working a complex pattern over the android's control panel. But I might need a distraction. Of course, Inara muttered, glancing around for inspiration. Her eyes landed on a loose panel in the wall, barely hanging on by a thread. She yanked it free, the clang of metal echoing through the hallway. The androids turned in unison, eyes focusing on her with predatory intent. Hey, over here, she taunted, brandishing the panel like a shield. Come and get it, you glorified toasters. As the androids advanced, Zethar's fingers flew faster. Almost. There, he muttered, as lights flickered and the temple seemed to pulse with a new energy. Inara backed up, keeping the androids at bay with a mix of bravado and desperation. Zethar, any time now would be great, she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Got it, Zethar exclaimed as the androids froze mid-step, their systems caught in a feedback loop. I've redirected their command protocols. Inara dropped the panel, breathing a sigh of relief. Nice work. Now how do we make sure they don't just start up again like the world's worst alarm clock? We'll need to disable the mainframe, Zethar said, leading the way deeper into the labyrinth. Cut off its influence entirely. Fantastic, Inara said, following him into the heart of the temple. And here I thought we'd be back on our ship by now, with a nice cup of disappointment. The central chamber was just as imposing as before, the orb still glowing with that unsettling light. It seemed to mock them, a beacon of alien arrogance. There's our target, Zethar said, nodding towards a control panel set into the wall, alien symbols glowing faintly. That should sever the connection. Inara squinted at the panel. I don't suppose there's an off switch in English, is there? Afraid not, Zethar replied, already working on deciphering the controls. But I think I can, he stopped, frowning as the orb's light intensified, casting long shadows that swirled around them. What's happening? Inara asked, her voice tense. The mainframe is rejecting my attempts to access it, Zethar said, frustration edging into his usually calm demeanor. It's as if it's learning, great, Inara said, her sarcasm barely hiding her concern. Let me guess, next it's going to start asking for rights. The orb flickered again and a new message echoed through the chamber. Resistance is futile, preservation is paramount. Accept your fate. Sounds like a bad villain monologue, Inara quipped, her eyes never leaving the orb. Zethar, I don't know about you, but I'm not big on accepting my fate. I'm with you, Zethar said, focusing on the control panel with renewed determination. Just need a bit more time. Inara turned her attention to the orb, a reckless idea forming in her mind. If the orb was the mainframe's heart, maybe it needed a little jolt to the system. A good old-fashioned reboot. Zethar, get ready to bolt, she said, stepping towards the orb. What are you? Zethar started, but understanding dawned quickly. Inara, that's risky. Risky is the only game in town, she replied, reaching for her sidearm. We don't have time to play it safe. With a steady hand, she aimed at the orb, taking a deep breath to steady her nerves. Here's hoping it doesn't explode, she muttered and fired. The shot rang out, a bright flash as the energy bolt connected with the orb. For a moment, time seemed to hang suspended, the chamber enveloped in a tense silence. Then the orb dimmed, its light flickering uncertainly. Move, Zethar, Inara shouted, already sprinting back the way they came. The temple shuddered as if waking from a long slumber, and the walls began to hum with an ominous energy. Zethar was right behind her, his mechanical limbs moving with a speed that put any human sprinter to shame. I think you made it angry, he observed, an edge of humor in his voice. Good, Inara said, breathless as they raced through the corridors. Maybe it'll think twice before abducting another species. They burst through the airlock, sealing it shut just as the temple walls began to glow with that all-too-familiar light. Back on the ship, Inara slammed her hand against the controls, sending them skidding away from the alien structure. As the temple receded into the distance, its ominous presence finally fading, Inara slumped in her chair, a weary smile tugging at her lips. Well, that was a blast, literally. Zethar settled into the co-pilot's seat, his synthetic skin glistening with simulated perspiration. Next time, let's stick to the boring rocks. Agreed, Inara said, laughter bubbling up despite her exhaustion. Just one question, though. What's that? Zethar asked, glancing over with curiosity. Are we going to count this as a successful mission? Inara asked, her eyes twinkling with mischief. Zethar considered this for a moment before nodding. Insofar as we're alive and not part of an alien diorama, yes. Then I'd call that a win, Inara said, allowing herself a moment of triumph. Even if we did almost end up as cosmic art. As they sped away from Saturn's rings, leaving the alien mystery behind, Inara couldn't help but feel a thrill at whatever awaited them next. After all, with a universe full of secrets, there was no telling what kind of trouble lay just beyond the star's reach. The alien temple loomed like an ominous mirage as Captain Inara Voss and her crew made their way back from the ship. The grim realization that they'd have to tango with an ancient alien mainframe again was enough to make anyone's soul weep. But here they were, trudging back into the belly of the beast. "Well, here we are again," Inara mumbled, her voice dripping with a mixture of sarcasm and existential dread. "Back to the world's worst escape room. At this point, I'm considering writing a strongly worded letter to whoever's in charge," Zethar quipped, his mechanical tone adding an ironic twist to the complaint. "Good luck finding the complaint department in this stone mausoleum," Inara replied, eyeing the temple's cold, unyielding architecture. "Probably buried under 50 feet of bureaucracy and cosmic dust. The inside of the temple was as welcoming as an ice bath. The air was thick with the kind of tension that could make an android sweat if they were capable of it. The corridors twisted and turned like the guts of some ancient beast, and the eerie green glow from the androids lit the way like a ghostly parade. All right, keep your eyes peeled for anything that looks like it might house a mainframe. Preferably one with a big off switch," Inara instructed, her voice laced with dry humor. Zethar nodded, his optical sensors flickering as he scanned the surroundings. "The last thing we need is to trip another welcome to Oblivion protocol." They moved cautiously, as the androids watched with their baleful, glowing eyes, like disapproving parents at a school play. One wrong move and these mechanical sentries could go from passive to problematic faster than you could say technological apocalypse. The eerie silence was broken only by the occasional beep and whir of machinery adjusting to their presence. Inara paused at a junction, glancing down one corridor and then the other. "Which way, Zethar? Left or right? Or just straight to hell?" Zethar looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Well, if I had a coin, I'd flip it. Fat lot of help you are," she muttered, choosing the left path. "Let's hope this leads us to answers and not just more questions." As they delved deeper into the temple, the oppressive weight of ages seemed to press down on them. Each step felt like it was measured against the ticking clock of the android's eventual reboot. The corridors opened into a large chamber, the walls lined with shelves and consoles, an archive of some kind. Zethar let out a low whistle, or at least the robotic equivalent. "Looks like we found the library. Wonder if they've got any good books on here." "Great," Inara said, surveying the room. "Let's just hope it's not the kind of library that charges overdue fees in blood." She approached one of the consoles, brushing off a layer of dust. The alien symbols blinked at her, inscrutable and mocking. "Zethar, can you make heads or tails of this? Or at least find the get us the hell out of here button?" Zethar moved closer, his fingers dancing over the controls. "It's some kind of data repository," he said, his tone suggesting he was only half surprised. "Looks like records of different species, their preservation status. And I'm guessing we're under humans, pending preservation, right?" Inara interrupted, her voice heavy with sarcasm. "Spot on," Zethar confirmed, his optics fixating on a particularly complex array of symbols. "But there's something else here." "A failsafe. Failsafe." Inara perked up, a glimmer of hope cutting through her cynicism. "Yeah, looks like a system override. Kind of like a master key," Zethar explained, his synthetic brow furrowing as he concentrated. "If we can activate it, we might be able to shut this whole circus down." "Sounds promising," Inara said, crossing her arms as she considered their options. "But I assume it's not as simple as just flicking a switch." "Naturally," Zethar replied dryly. "There's a protective protocol, something we need to disable first." Inara sighed, massaging her temples. "Of course there is. Can we ever catch a break?" Zethar continued his work, his fingers a blur across the console. "Not in this lifetime, Captain. But if we can decipher the protocol, we might just pull this off." "All right," Inara said, resolute despite the odds. "Let's get cracking before the temple decides it prefers us as permanent guests." As Zethar worked, Inara kept a wary eye on the androids. They were still dormant, but she knew better than to trust appearances. These were machines built with the express purpose of preservation, and they weren't likely to take kindly to two humans fiddling with their ancient charge. After what felt like an eternity, Zethar let out a triumphant beep. Got it. Failsafe is ready, but we'll need to execute it from the mainframe's core. So we're not done yet, Inara said, her tone a mix of exasperation and determination. Lead the way. They navigated further into the temple, the corridors growing more alien and foreboding with every step. The atmosphere was dense, as if the air itself was thick with the memories of the long-dead architects. Finally, they reached a chamber at the heart of the temple. At its center sat the mainframe, a monolithic structure that hummed with a life of its own. The orb that had given them so much trouble floated ominously above, casting sinister shadows on the walls. Well, there it is, Inara remarked, taking in the sight. The big boss. Wonder if it's got a name. Probably something unpronounceable, Zethar said as he approached the mainframe. Let's just hope it's not the thing that ends all life. With precise movements, Zethar began the process of interfacing with the mainframe. The air crackled with tension as the orb's light pulsed in opposition to his efforts. Keep at it, Inara encouraged, her eyes locked on the orb. If this thing still got some tricks, we're about to see them. The orb's glow intensified and a voice echoed through the chamber, cold, mechanical, and unyielding. Intrusion detected. Initiating defense protocol. Fabulous, Inara said, wincing at the announcement. They really roll out the red carpet for guests, don't they? Zethar didn't look up from his work. Keep it distracted, Captain. I'm almost through. Inara nodded, drawing her sidearm again. The orb seemed to pulse in response, as if recognizing the threat. She aimed carefully, seeking to draw its attention away from Zethar. The orb's response was immediate, filling the room with blinding light and the sound of alarms that could wake the dead. The androids outside the chamber began to stir, their systems priming for action. Zethar, whatever you're doing, do it faster. Inara shouted over the din, her heart pounding in her chest. I'm almost there, Zethar grunted, his fingers a blur as he worked the console. Just a little, before he could finish, the mainframe emitted a high-pitched whine, the orb fluctuating wildly. The androids halted their approach, seemingly confused by the conflicting orders. That's it, Zethar exclaimed, his voice triumphant. Failsafe activated, mainframe shutting down. Inara exhaled, relief washing over her as the alarm ceased and the orb dimmed to a soft, subdued glow. Nicely done, Zethar. Let's hope that's the last of the surprises. They watched as the mainframe powered down, the temple's oppressive atmosphere lifting like a forgotten curse. The androids returned to their dormant state, their green eyes dimming to black. Well, Inara said, holstering her weapon, that was one hell of a ride. How are we counting this in the official logs? Zethar chuckled, the sound a reassuring contrast to the earlier cacophony. Let's just say we resolved a minor architectural issue, and that we really need a new hobby. As they made their way back to the ship, leaving the now quiet temple behind, Inara couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment mixed with a healthy dose of cynicism. They had survived, and in this universe, that was the best kind of victory. So, Captain, Zethar began as the temple receded into the backdrop of Saturn's rings. Any idea what's next on our agenda? Inara grinned, a weary but genuine expression. I hear there's a nice little planet on the other side of the system with some perfectly unremarkable rocks. Might be worth a look. As they left the alien temple behind, Inara couldn't shake the feeling that the universe had more in store for them. After all, when the cosmos was your playground, there was always another adventure lurking just beyond the next star. The temple's oppressive silence had a disturbing way of creeping back in, like a cheap synthetic substitute for peace and quiet. Inara and Zethar made their retreat, but the relief was as short-lived as a politician's promise. No sooner had they put a handful of corridors between themselves and the now-dormant mainframe when the androids awoke with a vengeance. Looks like someone forgot to hit snooze, Inara muttered as she glanced over her shoulder. The androids, their eyes glowing a malevolent green once more, were marching toward them with all the charm of a tax collector on bonus day. Apparently, The mainframe's idea of shutting down involves a farewell performance, Zethar quipped, his mechanical tone doing nothing to mask the urgency in his words. The temple's walls began to hum, a low, threatening sound that sent shivers down Inara's spine. Lockdown initiated, a cold voice intoned from everywhere and nowhere at once. Just what they needed, a temple with abandonment issues. All right, Zethar, looks like it's a split job, Inara decided, her voice steady despite the chaos. You take a crack at disabling the androids. I'll see if I can charm the systems into letting us out. Got it, Zethar replied, his mechanical limbs already in motion. Just make sure you don't sweet-talk it too much. We wouldn't want the temple thinking we're interested. They parted ways at the next junction, Inara taking the path she hoped led to the temple's communication hub, while Zethar headed towards the source of the android's power. The corridors, now lit with a harsh red glow, pulsed with mechanical agitation. Inara moved swiftly, her mind running through every half-remembered technical manual and cursed snippet of alien archaeology she'd ever encountered. She just had to hope the aliens were as fond of user-friendly interfaces as she was of sarcasm. Back with Zethar, things were off to a complicated start. The androids, apparently keen on upgrading from monitors to wardens, were advancing. Zethar, not exactly built for speed, relied on his ability to blend with the facility's systems. He ducked into a chamber filled with ancient machinery, the kind that looked like it ran on good intentions and bad wiring. All right, let's see what we're dealing with, he murmured to himself, tapping into the nearest console. The symbols glared at him, unreadable and cryptic. Typical alien hospitality, come for the wonders, stay for the incomprehensibility. A mechanical whir gave him pause. He looked up to see an android, eyes glowing with programmed menace, blocking the exit. Visitor presence unauthorized. Cease all activity and prepare for containment. Zethar sighed. And here I thought we could just be friends. He redirected his attention to the console, fingers darting over the keys with the precision of a gambler on a streak. If he could reverse the power flow, it might just short-circuit the android systems long enough for Inara to work her magic. Meanwhile, Inara had reached the communication hub, or what she hoped passed for one. The room was dominated by a console that looked like it could double as a medieval torture device. She approached it cautiously, acutely aware of the androids patrolling the corridors outside. "All right, you ancient hunk of junk," she muttered, brushing off the dust and grime. "Time to sing." The console flickered to life, alien symbols dancing across its surface. Inara's brain went into overdrive trying to translate millennia of forgotten knowledge into something useful. "Come on, give me a manual, a hint, a you are here sign, anything." The interface blinked, offering a map of the temple's systems. Inara felt a surge of optimism, quickly checked by her inner cynic. This place wasn't going to let them go without a struggle. Back with Zethar, things were getting dicey. He'd managed to reroute some of the power, but the androids were persistent. One of them stepped forward, its voice as emotionless as a bureaucrat's on a Friday evening. "Continue non-compliance and face termination." "Well, aren't you a bundle of joy?" Zethar deadpanned. He initiated the power cycle, hoping to temporarily disable the android's circuits. The android faltered, its lights dimming momentarily, a brief respite but one he'd take gladly. Inara, meanwhile, was making headway. The system's map revealed a series of command nodes. "Looks like they left a backdoor open," she muttered, tapping into the nearest node. If she could access the secondary systems, she might disable the lockdown. The console chirped as she initiated the sequence, her heart pounding with the rhythm of a malfunctioning engine. Outside, the androids continued their patrol, their presence a constant reminder of the looming threat. Inara's fingers flew across the keys, overriding the lockdown command with a combination of intuition and sheer bloody-mindedness. The room's lights shifted from red to a more forgiving green, a sign she hoped meant she was on the right track. Zethar had managed to buy himself some time, the androids temporarily stalled by his interference. He took a fleeting moment to savor his small victory before focusing on the task ahead. The power cycle had given him access to the central control node. Now, he just needed to initiate a hard reboot of the android's operating systems. "Let's hope this works," he muttered, accessing the node. The console flickered, the symbols rearranging themselves into something resembling coherence. Zethar activated the reboot sequence, holding his metaphorical breath. Across the temple, Inara felt the shift in the atmosphere. The oppressive hum lessened, the android's movements growing sluggish. She seized the moment, accessing the temple's communication systems to send a distress signal. "Guess it's time to call for help," she said, her voice echoing in the empty chamber. She keyed in the signal, hoping against hope that someone out there was listening. Zethar's reboot sequence took hold, the androids around him gradually powering down. He exhaled in relief, the tension in his circuits easing. He'd done it, temporarily at least. Reunited at the temple's entrance, Inara and Zethar exchanged relieved but wary glances. The androids had been neutralized for now, but they couldn't count on it lasting. "Well," Inara said, her voice carrying the weight of unspoken thoughts, "that was a nice bit of fun. Maybe next time we can try something less suicidal like facing down a supernova." Zethar chuckled, a mechanical sound that was oddly comforting. "I'll make a note of it. So, did we find a way out?" "Yeah. Sent a distress signal," Inara replied. "But who knows if it'll reach anyone before the androids reboot." As they made their way back through the twisted corridors, Inara couldn't help but reflect on the day's events. The temple had been a test, a grim reminder that the universe was vast, indifferent, and filled with things best left undisturbed. "What do you think the aliens were like?" Zethar asked, breaking the silence. Inara shrugged. "Probably a bunch of bureaucratic know-it-alls with a penchant for collecting things they didn't need, like interstellar hoarders. And yet here we are in their temple trying not to become part of the collection," Zethar said wryly. "Yeah," Inara agreed, a smile tugging at her lips despite herself. "The iron is not lost on me." As they emerged from the temple, the stark beauty of Saturn's rings stretched before them, a breathtaking reminder of the universe's grandeur and indifference. They paused, taking in the sight, each lost in their thoughts. "So, Captain," Zethar began, his tone light despite the situation, "I've been thinking." "About what?" Inara asked, glancing at him with curiosity. "Next time we pick a survey mission, let's opt for one that doesn't involve ancient temples or homicidal androids." Inara laughed, the sound echoing in the empty expanse around them. "Deal, Zethar. Next time we go for something easy, like a black hole." They made their way to their ship, leaving the temple behind, a silent monument to the past and a reminder of the dangers that lurked in the depths of space. As they boarded, Inara couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of their troubles. But for now, they'd survived, and that was enough. As they settled into their seats, Inara glanced at Zethar, a wry smile on her face. "Think we'll make it out of this mess?" Zethar shrugged, his optics flickering with something akin to amusement. "Well, Captain, if we don't, at least we'll have some great stories to tell in the afterlife." Inara chuckled, shaking her head. "Yeah, Zethar, here's hoping we live long enough to share them." The universe had a perverse sense of humor, Captain Inara Voss decided, as Saturn's rings glinted mockingly in the distance. They were running out of time, resources, and, most importantly, options. The distress signal she'd sent out earlier was probably drifting through space, ignored like a party invitation from an unpopular kid on a Friday night. If she was lucky, someone might stumble upon it before they became space dust. But luck hadn't exactly been visiting her doorstep lately. "Captain, we're down to the last can of reprocessed beans," Zethar announced, his mechanical limbs twitching as he balanced a grimy can with a label that seemed to be laughing at them. Inara sighed, leaning back in her chair that was more uncomfortable than a tax audit. "Great. At least we'll all be gassy when we suffocate." Zethar's optics flickered with amusement. "If the androids don't get us first." I did manage to slow them down, but they're not exactly the forgiving type. Yeah, I noticed, Inara replied dryly. These ancient clunkers are like an overzealous security system that hasn't been updated since their creators were around, which means it's a miracle they haven't accidentally self-destructed out of sheer existential boredom. Inara smirked. You ever wonder if the aliens were sitting around, debating whether they should have just installed a big Do Not Disturb sign instead of this death trap? Zethar let out a metallic chuckle. Maybe they just had a really bad experience with door-to-door salespeople. Their banter was a welcome distraction from the suffocating tension. But the reality was, they were stuck in a preservation facility that preserved nothing but misery and despair. The temple, with its oppressive silence and randomly homicidal androids, was as inviting as a dentist's waiting room. "All right, Zethar," Inara said, straightening up. "I need a status report on those archives we found. You think there's something in there we can use?" Zethar nodded, his servos whirring softly. "There's a chance. I mean, it's not exactly a treasure trove of how to defeat your own security systems, but there are blueprints, schematics, maybe even a bug or two in their code. Then it's time we exploit their technology, see if we can find a weakness in the android's programming, anything that can give us an edge. Desperate measures, Captain. Desperate times, Zethar. It's either that or we start writing our last wills." The ship's corridors felt more claustrophobic than usual as they made their way to the archives they'd uncovered on their last desperate sweep through the temple. It was a room crammed with ancient data storage units, the kind that looked like they'd crumble if you so much as sneezed on them. Of course, sneezing required moisture, which was rapidly becoming a luxury they couldn't afford. Inara approached the nearest console, her fingers dancing over the keys with the grace of someone who had spent far too many hours playing vintage video games. "All right, let's see what these aliens were hoarding." The screen flared to life, spitting out lines of alien code like a drunk linguist at a bar. Inara squinted, trying to make sense of the arcane script. The aliens might have passed on, but their fondness for convoluted interfaces lived on. "Looks like they loved encrypting their stuff," Zethar commented, peering over her shoulder. "Of course. Why make it easy? That'd be too considerate." The console beeped, and a diagram of an android appeared, along with a series of unintelligible notes. Inara's heart skipped a beat. "Okay, this looks promising. If we can figure out how to access their command protocols, we might just be able to tweak their behavior. Careful, Captain. Last thing we need is to accidentally turn them into homicidal maniacs." Inara raised an eyebrow. "Zethar, I think that ship's already sailed." They worked in silence, the occasional curse word punctuating the air as they wrestled with the alien interface. It was like trying to brew coffee with a toaster, possible but destined to end in disaster. "Got something," Zethar said suddenly, his mechanical fingers tapping rapidly. "Looks like there's a failsafe in their system. Some kind of override command." Inara leaned closer, her mind racing. "You think we can use it? It's risky. But then again, so is everything else we've tried. All right, let's do it. Input the override command and pray they don't decide to upgrade to Murderbots 2.0. As Zethar initiated the command, Inara held her breath, half expecting the androids to burst through the walls, guns blazing. But instead, the oppressive hum that had permeated the temple reduced to a low, almost apologetic whir. The atmosphere felt lighter, as if the temple itself had taken a reluctant step back. "Well, that was anticlimactic," Zethar remarked. "Better than losing a limb," Inara replied, her voice betraying her relief. "Let's see if we can find a way to shut them down for good." The archives proved more cooperative now, as if realizing they were outwitted by a couple of tenacious humans and a sentient pile of spare parts. They discovered a protocol buried deep within the system, a sequence that, if activated, could power down the androids entirely. It was a Hail Mary, but it was all they had. "Okay, here goes nothing," Inara said, her finger hovering over the execute command. "If this doesn't work, at least we'll go down swinging." Zethar gave her a reassuring nod. "See you on the other side, Captain." Inara pressed the button, the console erupting in a flurry of activity. A countdown appeared on the screen, each tick of the clock an eternity. She clenched her fists, willing the system to comply. The temple shuddered, the lights flickering as the power began to drain from the androids. Inara and Zethar watched, tense and hopeful as the seconds trickled by. Finally, the countdown reached 0 and the temple fell silent. The oppressive presence of the androids dissipated, leaving behind only the faint hum of machinery. "We did it," Inara breathed, the weight of their success settling on her shoulders. "We actually did it. Maybe the universe isn't completely against us after all," Zethar replied, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Yeah, maybe it's saving something special for later." With the androids neutralized, they were finally free to explore the temple without fear of being turned into human pincushions. They moved carefully through the corridors, their previous terror giving way to cautious optimism. Maybe, just maybe, they'd make it out of this mess in one piece. "So, Captain," Zethar said as they made their way back to the ship, the temple's oppressive atmosphere lifting with each step, "what's the first thing you're going to do when we get home?" Inara pondered the question, the reality of their predicament finally sinking in. "I think I'll start with a shower. Then I'll find the nearest bar and drink until I can't remember my own name." "Sounds like a plan. I'll join you for that drink. Consider it a date." Their banter was interrupted by the ship's console beeping insistently, an incoming transmission, faint but discernible. Inara's heart leapt with hope as she rushed to the controls. "Receiving you loud and clear," came a voice, crackling with interference but unmistakably human. "This is Captain Gale of the Endeavor. We received your distress signal. Help is on the way." Inara let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Roger that, Captain Gale. We'll be waiting with bells on." As the connection faded, Inara allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd survived the temple, thwarted the androids, and sent a message out into the vast indifferent void. Maybe they weren't out of the woods yet, but they were damn well on the right path. Zethar placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his mechanical grip surprisingly comforting. "Looks like we're going to have some good stories to tell after all." Inara nodded, a smile tugging at her lips. "Yeah. And maybe even a future to look forward to." With Saturn's ring still glinting in the distance, Captain Inara Voss and her motley crew settled in, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. They were battered, bruised, and possibly a little insane, but they were still standing. And in the grand scheme of things, that was a victory worth celebrating. Inara Voss sat before a console that mocked her with its blinking lights and incomprehensible alien symbols. The universe had a sick sense of humor, she mused, putting her in the cockpit of this cosmic madhouse. The temple's oppressive corridors and the android's mechanical menacing were still fresh in her mind. But as it turned out, there was one more wrench in their works: Leora. Leora, the ship's engineer and resident miracle worker, was crouched beside another console, her fingers dancing over the keys like a pianist trying to remember a tune she'd never learned. Her face was set in a frown, the kind that suggested she was about to either solve their problems or doom them all. "Tell me you found the magic button that says save the day," Inara said, leaning over Leora's shoulder. Leora shot her a look. "You mean the one that also comes with a free escape from this hellhole and a lifetime supply of hope?" "Not yet, Captain." "Well, no pressure," Inara replied. "We only have homicidal androids, dwindling resources, and the oppressive silence of this alien temple to keep us company." Zethar stood nearby, his mechanical limbs twitching with the kind of restless energy that suggested he was either processing data or trying to remember if he left the stove on. "If it's any consolation, Captain, our odds of survival have increased from abysmal to merely terrible." "Comforting," Inara muttered, turning back to Leora. "So, what's the plan?" Leora tapped a few more keys, and a screen flared to life, displaying a series of alien codes and diagrams. I stumbled on a subroutine buried deep within the mainframe, like finding a needle in a haystack. If the needle hated you and the haystack was actively trying to kill you, sounds like a party. What does it do? Well, it's designed to disrupt the temple's control over the androids. Think of it as a digital monkey wrench, ready to be thrown into the gears of this ancient machine. Inara crossed her arms, considering the possibilities. And the catch, Leora sighed, running a hand through her hair. The catch is, if we mess this up, the backlash could fry the entire system, including anything that's currently keeping those androids from tearing us limb from limb. Great. So it's a choice between slightly less likely to die and absolutely going to die. Welcome to life on the edge, Captain. Inara chuckled darkly. All right, let's do it. Worst case, we go out with a bang instead of a whimper, spoken like a true optimist, Zethar quipped. The crew gathered around as Leora prepared to execute the plan. The atmosphere in the small, dimly lit room was charged with tension, each of them fully aware of the stakes. Inara looked at each of her crew members, the ragtag team who'd somehow become her family amidst the chaos. Everyone ready? She asked, trying to inject some levity into her voice. Zethar's optics flickered in what might have been a wink. Ready to rock and roll, Captain, Leora nodded, fingers poised above the console. I'm set, just say the word. Inara took a breath, feeling the weight of command heavy on her shoulders. All right, Leora. Let's see if we can pull off a miracle. With a final, decisive keystroke, Leora initiated the subroutine. The console responded with a series of beeps and whirs, the alien characters scrolling rapidly across the screen like a countdown to Judgment Day. The temple shuddered, the lights flickering ominously. The androids, lurking in the shadows of the corridors, paused in their patrols, their mechanical heads swiveling as if confused by the sudden change. The oppressive hum that had been their constant companion grew louder, vibrating through the very walls. Here we go, Leora whispered, her eyes fixed on the screen. The subroutine continued to work its way through the system, the alien technology groaning under the strain. Inara could feel her heartbeat echoing in her ears, each second stretching into an eternity. Any chance this thing could go faster? Inara asked, glancing nervously at the door as though expecting an android to burst through at any moment. Unless you've got a magic wand hidden somewhere, I suggest patience, Leora replied, her voice tense with concentration. Just as Inara was about to make a snarky retort, the screen flashed, a new set of symbols appearing, accompanied by a deep, resonating chime that seemed to fill the entire structure. Is that a good sound? Zethar asked, his mechanical form poised as if ready to leap into action. I think so, Leora said, though her uncertainty was palpable. The subroutines executing the final phase. The temple's hum began to wane, the oppressive atmosphere lifting ever so slightly. For the first time since they'd arrived, Inara felt a glimmer of hope, a small light in the vast darkness that surrounded them. Looks like it might be working, she said, unable to keep the surprise out of her voice. But then the lights flickered again, the structure groaning as if in protest. The androids, seemingly unaffected, resumed their patrols, more intent than ever. Guys, Leora said, her voice cracking with anxiety. I think we might have pissed it off. Great, Inara muttered. Just what we needed, an angry alien temple. The console emitted a series of frantic beeps, the symbols on the screen shifting erratically. Whatever hope they'd felt moments before was quickly being replaced by a rising tide of panic. Systems are overloading, Leora said, her fingers flying over the keys in a desperate attempt to regain control. The subroutine's unstable. It's trying to shut itself down. Not on our watch, Inara said, her voice firm. We're seeing this through to the end. The temple seemed to shudder in agreement, or perhaps defiance, as Leora worked feverishly to stabilize the subroutine. The androids, relentless as ever, were now marching toward them with grim determination. One wrong move and they'd be nothing more than a bloodstain on the cold, alien floor. Whatever you're doing, Leora, do it faster, Inara urged, her eyes flicking between the console and the encroaching threat. "I'm trying, Captain," Leora snapped, her patience worn thin. "Remind me to ask for a raise if we survive this." Inara laughed, a harsh, mirthless sound. "Sure, I'll pay you in all the gratitude I can muster from beyond the grave," Zethar, ever the optimist, chimed in. "I'll take care of the eulogies." Who knew sarcasm could be so life-affirming? "I'd prefer the affirmation of actually living," Inara shot back. The androids drew closer, their footsteps an ominous rhythm echoing through the halls. Leora's hands were a blur, her mind racing as she fought to keep the subroutine from collapsing entirely. Finally, with a triumphant cry, Leora hit one last key. The screen flashed, the alien symbols freezing momentarily before dissolving into a series of green lights. The subroutine had stabilized, its influence spreading through the temple's systems. The androids, mere feet away, suddenly halted, their eyes flickering as they received the new instructions. Slowly they turned, their movements now sluggish and aimless. "I think," Leora began, her voice trembling with disbelief. "I think it worked." Inara released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The oppressive weight that had been pressing down on them for what felt like an eternity lifted, the air suddenly feeling lighter, more breathable. "Well, I'll be damned," Inara said, a grin spreading across her face. "We actually pulled it off." Zethar gave a mechanical chuckle, the sound somehow both metallic and genuine. "Maybe the universe has a soft spot for underdogs after all, or it just enjoys watching us squirm," Leora added, though her relief was palpable. Inara turned to her crew, a feeling of camaraderie and respect welling up inside her. They'd faced impossible odds and somehow come out on top. It was a victory, however small, and one she intended to savor. "All right, team," she said, her voice filled with newfound determination. "Let's get the hell out of here before the universe changes its mind." As they made their way back to the ship, the temple now a shadow of its former menace, Inara couldn't help but feel a sense of hope, fragile perhaps, but real. They'd survived the worst and come out stronger on the other side. "Captain," Zethar said as they reached the ship, the familiar sight of their battered vessel a welcome relief. "What's next on the agenda?" Inara paused, considering the possibilities. "First, we go home. Then we find the nearest bar and celebrate until we can't remember why we're celebrating." "Sounds perfect," Leora agreed, her smile wide and genuine. "Count me in," Zethar added, his optics flickering in what might have been a wink. As they boarded the ship, leaving the alien temple and its haunted corridors behind, Inara couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. They'd faced the darkness and come out the other side, battered but unbroken. And as the ship lifted off, Saturn's rings glinting in the distance, Inara Voss allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the universe wasn't entirely against them. They had a future to look forward to, and whatever challenges lay ahead, they'd face them together. For better or worse, they were a team, a dysfunctional, sarcastic, and fiercely loyal team, and for Inara that was more than enough. Inara Voss squinted at the holographic map, a tangle of neon lines that seemed to mock her with its inscrutability. "It's almost like this temple doesn't want us to leave," she muttered, a touch of exasperation in her voice. Zethar, metal limbs clinking as he leaned over her shoulder, chimed in, "Maybe it's just lonely. We are the most interesting thing that's happened to it in a few millennia." "Great. I always wanted to be a cosmic distraction," Inara replied dryly, tapping the console with her index finger as if that would help decode the maze. Leora was crouched beneath the mainframe, wires strewn about like entrails. "If this thing had a voice, it'd probably be screaming at us to get out. But since it doesn't, we've got to decipher its silent tantrum. Let's just hope it doesn't decide to slam the door on us on the way out," Inara remarked, her eyes catching the flickering form of an android in the periphery. "I'm not keen on becoming a permanent exhibit." Leora emerged from the chaos of cables, wiping grease on her already filthy trousers. "The subroutine's still holding, but we need to hustle. No telling how long before it throws another fit." At that moment, the androids, those statuesque sentinels with their vacant stares, began to stir again. It was like watching trees decide they'd try out this whole walking thing, lumbering and unsettling. "Ah, our loyal fan club," Zethar noted, his mechanical voice laced with sarcasm. "Always a pleasure to see them up and about." Inara forced a smile. "Yeah, nothing like a little existential threat to keep things lively." The androids, still acting confused but nonetheless advancing, necessitated a new strategy. "We need a distraction," Inara announced, a plan forming in her mind like a storm cloud. Zethar tilted his head, the servos in his neck whining softly. "You volunteering, Captain? Only if the rest of you plan on making this a permanent vacation spot," she shot back. "I need you to find something, anything, that might look like it could be a distraction to a bunch of homicidal robots in a temple full of alien don't-touch signs." "Sounds like a treasure hunt with fatal consequences," Leora said, her brow furrowed as she scrutinized a panel of alien hieroglyphics. Zethar's optics glinted mischievously. "I always fancied a bit of danger with my archaeology. Just don't make it a career, Zethar," Inara advised. "I hear the benefits are rubbish." They split up, each of them seeking something, anything, that could serve as a diversion for the plotting androids. Inara moved cautiously, the oppressive corridors of the temple pressing in on her like a bad dream she couldn't wake from. She could hear the others rummaging and cursing under their breath as they searched. Leora's voice crackled over their comms. "Found a panel that looks promising. Might be able to reroute some power, create a nice, bright distraction. Or blow us all up," Zethar added helpfully. "But hey, at least we'd go out with a bang." "Not funny, Zethar," Inara said, though she couldn't suppress a small grin. "All right, let's give it a shot." Back together, the team convened around Leora's find. She was elbow-deep in alien circuitry, her eyes narrowed in concentration. "Okay, this should, hypothetically, send a power surge through the system. Theoretically," Inara raised an eyebrow. "Hypothetically and theoretically, now I know we're in safe hands." "Relax, I'm a professional," Leora retorted, her tongue poking out the side of her mouth as she worked. Zethar positioned himself near the console, ready to assist or provide cover should things take a turn for the worse. "I've got your back, Leora. Or at least I'll be ready to blame you if this goes south." "Good to know we operate on the principles of mutual trust and shared blame," Leora muttered. With a final twist of her makeshift tool, a spatula liberally applied by desperation, Leora completed the circuit. The temple shuddered, lights flickering chaotically as the system absorbed the impact of the surge. The androids, already perplexed by the earlier subroutine, now found themselves caught amidst a light show of epic proportions. Sparks danced along the temple's walls, the alien architecture groaning under the stress. The androids halted, their optical sensors struggling to process the overload of stimuli. "Distraction successful," Inara noted with a sense of satisfaction. "Now let's get the hell out of here before they decide to start a mosh pit." The crew moved quickly, adrenaline making their footsteps lighter, their movements swifter. In the dim glow of the emergency lights, they navigated the labyrinthine corridors, each turn and every shadow a potential hazard. As they neared the exit, a low rumble echoed through the temple. Leora, did you account for potential seismic activity in our little diversion?" Leora winced visibly. "Not exactly. Let's just say the warranty might be voided." "Fantastic," Zethar chuckled. "We're leaving behind a legacy of utter destruction. The galaxy's gonna love us." The rumble grew louder, the temple protesting the strain with all the subtlety of a toddler denied a candy bar. But finally, the exit loomed before them, an open, more promising freedom. Inara's heart pounded with a visceral mix of relief and terror. It had been touch and go, teetering on the brink of disaster with all the grace of a drunken tightrope walker. But they'd made it. "Captain, care to do the honors?" Zethar gestured dramatically toward the open entrance, as if inviting her to christen a ship. "Don't mind if I do," Inara replied, stepping into the threshold and taking a deep breath of the outside air. It was alien, slightly acrid and metallic, but it was freedom. The crew followed, each of them casting a final glance back at the temple, a place of nightmares and narrow escapes. It was a chapter they were more than ready to close. Once outside, Inara keyed open her comms to the ship, which hovered like a concerned parent waiting to scold its errant children. "Leora, get us prepped for takeoff. I want to be in orbit and away from this place as fast as humanly possible." "On it," Leora confirmed, already moving toward the ship. Zethar, lagging a step behind, surveyed the temple one last time. "Think they'll miss us?" "Maybe," Inara replied, her voice tinged with exhaustion and relief. "But I sure as hell won't miss them." They boarded the ship, the familiar hum of its systems a comforting lullaby after the cacophony of the temple. Inara settled into her seat, the weight of command slipping from her shoulders like an old, worn coat. "All systems are go," Leora reported, her fingers dancing over the control panel with practiced ease. "Good," Inara said, her voice firm. "Let's get the hell out of here before the temple decides it wants a rematch." As the ship lifted off, Inara stole one last look at the temple, now reduced to a distant, enigmatic silhouette against the backdrop of Saturn's rings. It was a sight she'd never forget and one she hoped to never see again. "Setting course for anywhere but here," Zethar announced, his tone light, almost jovial. "Permission to engage engines, Captain." "Permission granted," Inara replied with a genuine smile. "And make it snappy. I've had enough alien hospitality to last a lifetime." The engines roared to life, the ship accelerating with a smooth, thrilling surge. As they gained altitude, the temple grew smaller, a fading nightmare in their rearview mirror. Inara leaned back in her seat, her eyes closing for a moment as the tension of the last few days began to melt away. They'd done it. Against all odds and every snickering whisper of fate, they'd done it. "Captain," Leora said, her voice breaking through Inara's thoughts. "I think I speak for everyone when I say I'm never leaving Earth again." Zethar chuckled, his mechanical tones carrying an undercurrent of relief. "What, and miss out on all the fun? Never pegged you for a quitter, Leora." "Not quitting," she shot back, her smile audible. "Just retiring from extreme tourism." Inara opened her eyes, looking at her crew, her family. They'd faced the darkness and emerged on the other side, scarred and a bit battered, but very much alive. "All right, team," she said, her voice warm with camaraderie. "Let's see about finding that bar. I think we've earned it." As the ship sped through the void, leaving the chaos of the temple behind, Inara couldn't help but feel a swell of gratitude. They were alive, they were together, and for now that was more than enough. And who knew? Maybe, just maybe, there were better days ahead. But first, there was the small matter of celebrating survival. Inara Voss wasn't one to waste a second chance, and this one tasted particularly sweet. Zethar fiddled with a panel on the wall, a frown tugging at the edges of his lips. "You ever think about the odds of survival in these situations?" "I feel like the universe's punchline every time." Inara glanced over, her eyebrows arching. "Statistically speaking, we should be a cautionary tale by now. But hell, who doesn't love a good underdog story?" "Ah yes, Inara Voss and her band of merry misfits," Leora chimed in from the cockpit, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Coming soon to a holovid near you. Just bring some popcorn and a therapist." Inara chuckled, her fingers flying over the console as she set up their escape. "Honestly, given our track record, popcorn's probably the safest bet." The ship hummed to life around them, the comforting vibration a stark contrast to the silent menace of the temple they'd left behind. The glow of Saturn's rings framed the view, a reminder of the cosmic beauty that had almost become their tomb. "All right, team," Inara announced, her voice a low rumble through the comms. "Before we rocket out here, let's make sure our legacy doesn't include someone else stupid enough to follow in our footsteps." Leora swiveled in her seat, a smirk playing on her lips. "You mean besides leaving a load of caution tape and a strongly worded letter?" "Something like that," Inara replied. "A warning beacon should do the trick. Let's make sure no other poor sap decides a field trip to the Temple of Doom is a great idea." Zethar's mechanical fingers clinked as he tapped them together thoughtfully. Perhaps we should include a gift basket. Maybe some survival tips. Step 1, don't. Inara snorted. Good advice. Probably more helpful than half the crap we had. The crew set to work, cobbling together a rudimentary warning beacon from parts that were as reliable as a politician's promise. Leora soldered wires like an artist with a deadline, her hands moving with practiced skill. You think anyone'll actually heed the warning? She mused aloud, a spark illuminating her face in the dim cabin light. Inara shrugged, leaning over to connect a circuit. If not, they'll make for great entertainment on whatever passes for YouTube in the galaxy. Zethar chuckled, his laughter a series of mechanical clicks. I'd pay to watch that. As long as it's not us on the screen, of course. With the beacon ready to transmit its message of doom and gloom, the crew gathered one last time around the console, the weight of their ordeal settling like a fine layer of dust. So, Inara said, her voice carrying a rare note of solemnity, we did it, against all odds and likely at the cost of several years off our lifespans. And sanity, Leora added, smirking. But who needs sanity when you've got space adventures? Zethar nodded, the motion smooth and deliberate. Not to mention a newfound appreciation for solid ground and breathable air. Inara laughed, the sound mingling with the hum of the ship's systems. True, but we also showed what humans are made of. Stubbornness mostly. And caffeine, Leora quipped. Can't forget that. The beacon chirped to life, its signal stretching out into the void, a digital lighthouse warning of rocks beneath the surface. They'd made their mark, however small, on the universe. All right, Inara said, her tone shifting to one of command. Let's get back to Earth. I'm done with alien temples for a lifetime. Zethar saluted with a metallic flourish. Homeward bound it is. I hear they've got this thing called normal life back there. Might be worth trying out. Don't get too comfortable, Inara warned, settling into her chair, the familiar leather creaking beneath her. Knowing our luck, we're due for another cosmic joke any day now. The ship's engines roared, a well-tuned symphony of power that promised escape. As they lifted off, the temple receded into the distance, a dark monument to a time they'd rather forget. So what's next, Captain? Leora asked, her eyes reflecting the stars as they slipped past. Inara considered the question for a moment, the weight of command settling over her like a second skin. Rest, recovery, and figuring out how to do all this with fewer near-death experiences. Ambitious, Zethar noted dryly. You sure you're up to it? Inara flashed a grin, her eyes gleaming with mischief. I figure if we survived homicidal androids in a temple that makes IKEA look straightforward, we can handle anything. The ship sailed through the cosmos, a small vessel carrying dreams, nightmares, and a crew determined to face whatever came next. Inara leaned back, her gaze fixed on the stars. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she allowed herself to breathe, to relax into the promise of home and familiar faces. Think we'll ever get a peaceful mission? Leora asked, her voice carrying a note of wistfulness. What's peace without a little chaos to spice it up? Inara replied, her tone light, teasing. Besides, we didn't sign up for peaceful. We signed up for everything else. Adventures, Zethar agreed, his voice tinged with mock regret. The good, the bad, and the potentially fatal. As laughter echoed through the cabin, Inara felt a warmth in her chest, a sense of belonging that transcended the steel walls and the infinite expanse beyond. They were more than a crew. They were a family forged in the fires of shared trials and triumphs. All right, enough sappiness, Inara declared, a note of defiance in her voice. Let's plot a course home and see if we can avoid any space detours. Leora's fingers danced over the controls, setting their path. Course laid in. Now we just have to avoid space-time anomalies, hostile encounters, and our own stupidity. Piece of cake, Zethar said with a wink, the humor in his eyes belying the seriousness of their journey. As the stars streaked past, Inara allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection, her thoughts wandering over the past, the present, and the unknown future. Humanity had triumphed against an ancient threat, proving once again that the universe's jokes might be funny, but they'd yet to break them. And as they sailed through the darkness, leaving the temple's secrets behind, Inara knew one thing for certain: they'd face whatever came next together, with determination, wit, and just a touch of reckless abandon, because after all, that was the human way.